1848, the Sandy and Beaver Canal has just been finished and is now open for business. This comes after 20 years of work with many setbacks along the way. By 1852, the Sandy and Beaver Canal would fail and cease to operate. But the effects of having the Sandy and Beaver Canal has lasted well beyond its short lifespan. For this episode, we will be examining the canal routes via the maps from Max Card and William Vaudreuil's 1952 book, The Sandy and Beaver Canal. The Sandy and Beaver Canal begins in Bolivar, Ohio in Tuscarawas County, and continues east along the proximity of modern-day Route 30, also known as the Lincoln Highway. The Sandy and Beaver Canal enters Columbiana County between locks 8 and 7. But before we go any further, let's go back and see how this all got started. In 1822, the Ohio legislature passed a resolution in favor of canals in Ohio. In 1827, a notice was made for the citizens of Columbiana County concerning interest in bringing a canal to the area. Consent was instantaneous. 1 year before that, on January 11, 1826, the Ohio legislature had voted in favor of incorporating the Sandy and Beaver Canal and to create a headquarters in New Lisbon, Ohio. Then, in 1828, they sent world-renowned engineer Major D.B. Douglas of the United States Military Academy to survey a potential route for the Sandy and Beaver Canal.
And he was very instrumental in other projects. They hired the people from Lisbon, the Hannas in particular, Benjamin Hanna, brought them up here, asked them to do a route to see if it was feasible. And he needed help. You know, he was more of an academic person, knew numbers, but putting the numbers into actual physical structures and overseeing construction, he was not. So he hired a local resident engineer by Joshua Malin, who helped him do the survey. But that's all it was. It was a land survey, theoretical areas, should have a lock here, a lock there, just based on the drop in the creek or the river. Eventually, the Sandy Beaver Canal Company was chartered from the state of Ohio to be built. You have to have a charter no matter what you did in the state back then. And so the company was chartered. They decided to go ahead. So in 1835, they decided to start construction. They needed an engineer to redo the survey as well as the construction. And so they selected Edward Gill. He was only 27 years old to do a massive project. That's mind-blowing to me. It's like somebody making an interstate system in Ohio and giving it to a fresh graduate. But back then, you were thoroughly educated. By the time you were 16, you worked as an apprentice under a skilled technical, quote, engineer, although no formal training. And he was hired. He came in from Philadelphia because Philadelphia was providing most of the money for the construction. They did have stocks issued for the Sandy Beaver locally, but it amounted to, I think, was it $25,000. The vast majority of the money came from Philadelphia. So they wanted their person that they could trust. And at that time, Edward Gill was actually a city engineer working for the city of Philadelphia. So he took on the responsibility, redid the survey with another gentleman, Huther Hay. He was a skilled engineer. He worked with Gill for the second survey, the land survey. And it was approved by the people of Philadelphia, so the money started to roll in.
Then there was the Panic of 1837. The Panic of 1837 was a major financial crisis that caused a depression for several years here in the United States. All wages plummeted and all Western expansion was put on hold. Many factors were key to this fallout, but most of the blame was put on President Andrew Jackson. And when construction costs exceeded the budget, Philadelphia was unable to continue funding the project. Eventually, the economy would pull itself out of this depression, but the canal's progress was definitely deprived. So instead of a high-quality, watertight lock, they would have to settle for a cheaper design. In 1845, They realized the railroads were coming and had to complete the canal project. They would lose their charter if the canal was not completed on time. Eventually, the Sandy and Beaver Canal was up and running, although it was a constant struggle.
You always would have the storms, locks were leaking, there were issues. For the Sandy Beaver, I would say you would need at least $50,000 or $60,000 a year of money from that time to keep the locks in order.
But while the canal was operating, the area experienced growth both economically and population-wise. One town that benefited from the canal was Hanover, modern-day Hanoverton.
Well, during the construction and operation of the canal, the population was 1,200, and that's in the incorporated limits. On the outside, it swelled to like 2,000 people. And compare it to today, in our incorporated area, we have 344 in population. Yeah, so big difference. It brought taverns or hotels, the Mansion House that was on the corner of Route 30 and 9, 7 general stores, a foundry, distillery, sawmill, the Arter and Nicholas warehouse, a livery stable, cabinet maker, furniture dealer, tannery, carriage and wagon making. Brought a lot of business to the area. Plymouth Street, that was the main street in the area before Route 9, which is 1st Street. And the first brick home was built in 1835. And it later became a home of Dr. Robertson, and he was big on helping the slaves that were fleeing from the South. And in his home, he had one section of his wall, you would see 5 windows, but on the inside, there were only 4. So he had a hidden room there that he would hide slaves. There was a tunnel from that Robertson house over to Brick Row. It's all filled in now. So if the people looking for the slaves would be at one house, they would move them to the other house. And if they go, they'd move them back.
We also spoke with our friend Heather Smith from our Underground Railroad documentary about her connection to Hanoverton, Ohio.
I was born in Philadelphia and lived there for about 3 months of my life. And then we moved to Hanoverton on Plymouth Street and lived on what they called Brick Row, my mom called it. And she was pregnant with my brother at the time, so I was very little. I was 14 months old in this picture. This was in 1980 when I lived there. The haunted history tours are a lot of fun. They tell about all the history there, and then we walk down and go to the cemetery, and they talk about the Christina Sloan, and they tell this story about how she's a witch, and they put a chain around the thing, and the curse on Hanoverton that she was going to cast on them and stuff. And so it's just an interesting story. And see, there's 2 Christina Sloans. There's one that was born out of wedlock. I think she was the one that was probably the one that was said to be like the witch, I'm assuming, in this story.
The big hoopla, the big controversy, the big mystery, I guess. So this right here is the burial plot for George and Jessie Sloan. George is the builder of Brick Row down there in town. He was one of the main canal people for the village. George had no vices, except for one. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't gamble. He just couldn't keep it in his pants and stay faithful to his wife. During one of his little escapades, he procreated a daughter with one of the ladies of the night of the village. And as you can see, he had a daughter named Christina. And out of spite, the lady of the night named the illegitimate daughter Christina as well. Christina lived a very troubled life. Her mom was in and out all the time for obvious reasons. She was abandoned when she was about 18 or 19. She told Christina who her father was, but advised her against ever confronting him. This is where the story branches off. Everyone, like the well-known urban legend is that Christina was a witch. She was hanged, this, that, and the other. Through quite a lot of work. And I know a lot of people, whenever they've watched this video, are gonna be like, nah, he's full of it, he's yada yada. This is just what I've found. Mr. Sloan hired 2 of the canal workers to go to Christina's little shack and cause a scene to scare her to get her out of town, because she had actually approached him and stated that she knew who he was, and it was in front of the tavern, and a lot of prominent people were there. During the altercation, she was allegedly, unfortunately, accidentally struck. She fell, she hit her head, fractured her skull, and passed away. To cover it up, the murder, they accused her of witchcraft and said that that's why she was no longer with us. She was buried actually right here in this unmarked grave. Former tour group has actually seen LiDAR images up here and everything. There actually is a body buried there. She was a very, very small woman. She's about 5'2", 5'4", 110, 120 pounds. Those Irish canal workers, they'd make me look like Mini-Me from Austin Powers. Like, there were some pretty big guys back then. However, that's not the end of the story. During the altercation, Christina said that her father wouldn't be able to save the village. So fast forward a couple more years to 1854, when James Farmer was coming through here. He was the main contractor for the railroad. Mr. Farmer was from Salineville, and he knew that Hanoverton would be the perfect spot for the railroad to come through. Its population was booming. It had everything here that it needed. It had the agriculture, it had the buildings, it had basically everything you needed for a thriving town was here. They had a vote with the townspeople, and it was a 4-to-1 no vote for the railroad. Mr. Farmer was incensed. He said that he would build the railroad so close that everyone would hear it, but you'd never see it. And that is the same track that actually goes through Kensington down here. As you guys know, being in Hanoverton, you can hear that thing whenever that train goes through. I used to be able to hear it in my house, and we're about 2 miles away. So that wasn't the end of it. Mr. Farmer was approached by one individual who approached him with $10,000 of his own money to commission the railroad. Mr. Farmer was incensed and still said, no, sir, it's done, the route is set, you will not be getting your railroad. That man was actually none other than George Sloan. Remember back to his illegitimate daughter's death, she said that he would never save the village. He tried to and he didn't. So call it coincidence, call it karma, call it a curse, which is what a lot of people believe. Say what you will. But he tried and failed to save the village. As we know now, Hanoverton has about 350 people in it. It actually went up in population, almost 60 people between the last 2 census. Also too, if you look at this monument here and how there's chains and everything going around it, a lot of people truly believe that Christina was a witch. Every single one of these bars and chains had a talisman on it of the all-seeing eye. The legend stated that whenever the last talisman fell, Hanoverton would fall as a village. Well, Hanoverton fell in 1854 with the railroad refusing to come through. The last talisman was gone in 2019. But what's odd is Hanoverton's population has actually gone up since the last one fell. Fun personal side note, my soon-to-be ex-wife used to do a lot of genealogy work, and she called me into the room. She's like, hey, why does that name look familiar? And on my family tree is actually George and Jessie Sloan. So that would actually make Christina Sloan my cousin. Both of them. Both of them.
We were also told by Hanover Township Historical Society President JoAnn Renicker Lucas that the bricks that were used to build Hanoverton's canal town originated in the now lost village of Adair.
And they brought them down here on sleds and built the homes, built the Spread Eagle, Brick Row, all those buildings that are brick. They had a clay that they found on the property in Adair, and that's how they made the bricks.
JoAnn also told us about the upcoming Canal Days Festival in Hanoverton.
The Canal Days, this year it's going to be October 21st, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. We have live music, we have good food, we have a parade, a bake sale at the Presbyterian Church, a best dressed pet contest. This year having a scarecrow contest, and the museum will be open for people. The Historical Society is open the first and third Saturday of every month from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m.
She also told us about other activities going on in Hanoverton.
Well, we do have a walking tour of the historical district starting at the corner of Route 9 and 30, going up Plymouth Street, and then we have the old schoolhouse up on 2nd Street. There is, of course, the Spread Eagle Tavern, where people can dine and stay. And the old Robertson House, we're told, is possibly going to be a bed and breakfast in the future.
The Hanover Township Historical Society also services the area of Dungannon, which is home to the St. Philip Neri Catholic Church. This church is considered the birthplace of Catholicism here in Ohio and was frequented by the Irish canal workers entrusted to build the Sandy and Beaver Canal. Make sure to visit this historic landmark on your next visit to Columbiana County, Ohio.
And then we have nearby is Guilford Lake, because our Historical Society covers Dungannon and Kensington, Hanoverton, New Garden, and Guilford.
There were 2 reservoirs at the summit, Guilford Lake being the larger one, and Cold Run, which was probably a couple miles further east, was the second one. Cold Run was a man-made dam as well as Guilford. You always wondered, if you walk along Guilford, where the heck did it get the soil? Where did they get the dirt to build that up? That's a swampy area. Where did they get it? And I have a program where they got it from, but they actually had to dig through hills. And they actually connected the Mahoning drainage system to the Sandy Beaver drainage system. I have an engineering report that Gil talks about it. It's disguised a little bit because names of the creeks and the runs were a little bit different. But I've been back there looking at the USGS topo maps. I says, this land looks strange, this isn't normal, and you go back there and they actually cut out a hillside that separated the Mahoning drainage system to the Sandy Beaver, or I should say the Sandy Creek system. The sides are very methodically at the same angle. You won't find that in a natural like ravine. And so by wagons, they pulled it down. This is north, obviously, of Guilford. And that was part of the dirt, the soil that was used to make the abutments. And the other part of the soil that was used along 172, there is a Zion Cemetery right by the county, I guess, detention center, is it? And that was also connected. And that soil, it goes, you have that cemetery on the hill, and you can see the ditch today with water in it. That was no water originally. That was a hillside like 30 feet up. And all that soil was hand dug out and carried over to Guilford Lake. And Cold Run had problems handling the stormwater, and it overcapped it. The spillway wasn't wide enough. Water kept rising. It topped over the earthen dam portion. Water is erosive. Started to etch into the dam. The more it etched, the more water went through. The more water went down the creek. And so there was a lot of massive flooding.
Doug also talked about documents and drawings from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, or ODNR, that showed that the landscape had been dramatically changed by the soil removal during the construction of the reservoirs.
But Coal Run also had a problem. It wasn't placed on stable ground. So after a few years, even before the canal came up in operation, it wasn't level anymore, the earthen dam. It was a slope. It was sinking. And there was no way for them to really know with the tools they had at that time what was the strata of the soil. But beneath the area they were going to put up the dam on Coal Run. And Guilford Lake, modern Guilford Lake, pretty much is the same elevation to the dam as it was back into 1830s. The Department of Natural Resources didn't add any extra top dirt. They added some girth for safety because back then the embankments were pretty shallow. They were just steep grades to hold the water. And they strengthened all dams in Ohio in the last 20 years by adding more dirts behind, or soil, not dirt, soil, behind the dam so that they would have a better safety factor.
Continuing our journey east along the Sandy and Beaver Canal, we eventually found ourselves in the McKinley Crossing and Rebecca Furnace area. While we were there, we were lucky enough to see John Horn's impressive Sandy and Beaver Canal exhibit at Camp McKinley. Camp McKinley, in the greater Lisbon area, has traditionally been used as a Boy Scout camp throughout the years. This area was also known as the boyhood home of 25th President William McKinley. Like Douglas Bacso, John Horn is one of the most knowledgeable historians on the Sandy and Beaver Canal and boasts the world's largest collection of Sandy and Beaver Canal relics. Continuing east on the Sandy and Beaver Canal route, we go through areas like Elkton, where we got to see Lock 24. As well as Williamsport, Martinsburg, and the Sprucevale area. We got to see historic Fredericktown again, and make sure to watch Revamping History's walkthrough video of School Number 8 in historic Fredericktown. And finally we got to see Jamestown and a couple of mills along the way. Ultimately, the Sandy and Beaver Canal exits Columbiana County between locks 55 and 56. And the Sandy and Beaver Canal ends at Glasgow, Pennsylvania, where it empties into the Ohio River.
So now I'm going to show you some of the items from the Revamping History collection that have to do with the Sandy and Beaver Canal. Alright, so we're going to start out with some of the books that we used during the research to make this video that you're watching today. Alright, so this first book here, The Sandy and Beaver Canal, it was written by Max Gard and William Vaudrey. Had a lot of information in it, a lot of really cool stuff. The maps were super useful, so this is one of the biggest resources we have for this video you're watching today. We even have the audio on CD-ROM. This is a pretty cool thing to have with it too. Alright, we had another book here called The Old Canal Days, written by Burton Porter. This is a really good book. It's about Canal Fulton, Ohio. It doesn't necessarily have to do with the Sandy and Beaver Canal, but a lot of really cool stuff in here. A lot of great ideas you can learn about different stuff about canals. Alright, and another really useful resource here was basically the Ohio canals, but the Sandy and Beaver Canal, written by Len Loomis. This is a really good book. We read through it. A lot of really good pictures in here, a lot of good stuff about the Sandy and Beaver Canal. Definitely one of the good resources for this video you're watching today. Alright, so that was some of the books that we used for this, but we also have a good collection of postcards at Revamping History. This first one here has a little discrepancy around it, but it's a canal boat, Mary Ann, as it's approaching the big tunnel on the 1 mile east of Hanover. And we always make sure we put our postcards in a lot of these good cases whenever we can afford it. Alright, the second one is actually from Magnolia, Ohio. This is the North Bridge. These postcards, you can learn a lot from them. A lot of people's names on them, where they're going, who they're sent to, where they're coming from. This is the deep cut on the road leading into Hanoverton, Ohio from the north. Pretty cool picture there. Looks like an uprooted tree. Yeah, cool thing about these postcards, it's nice looking at the stamps on them, and of course the addresses and sometimes the personalized notes that go along with them. All right, another one here from the Welcome Home celebration in Hanoverton. Yeah, pretty cool picture there. Yeah, this one has a really cool story in the back of it. Yeah, again, nice to look at the postage stamps and the different stories that go along with these things. Then we have one more here that we haven't had a chance to actually case up yet. This is one of the brand new items we received recently. This is actually one that was actually sent to Floretta M. Johnson Sloan, and she was actually the wife of James R. Sloan. And if you remember earlier, James R. Sloan is going to end up being the brother of Christina Ann Sloan. Yeah, so a lot of connections here. Again, interesting postcard, got the postage on it. All right, so that was the postcards that we have. We also have a couple really cool envelopes here that we have that were addressed to different people about the canal stuff, but this one here is from 1962, and this one's actually showing Lusk Lock, you know, part of the Sandy and Beaver Canal. And it's kind of cool having these little envelopes like this. Then our last item here, another envelope. This is actually a letter that was actually mailed to R. Max Guard, who, if you remember earlier, he was the author of one of the authors of the Sandy and Beaver Canal book. But this is an envelope that somebody actually mailed to him. We were lucky enough to actually get this into our possession. And it's always interesting seeing a lot of these old letters and different things like that.
So those were just a few of the items from the Revamping History collection that deal with the Sandy and Beaver Canal.
So that was our story on the Sandy and Beaver Canal. We always encourage people to do more research because there was much more to the story than what we showed in this video. We also want to thank all of our guests and everybody who helped behind the scenes. So on behalf of Revamping History, I'm Roy, that's my brother Jesse. Thanks a lot for watching, we'll see you next time.